So let's take a final look at Book 6, The Divided Line. I really hesitate to make this little talk because the material is so challenging. But let's see where we are here. I'm starting on page 204, 205, and Socrates and Glaucon have been discussing what is true, what is real. And Socrates has made a division, and we must be familiar with divisions by now. I mean, I'm suggesting that if you look at the little notes that I've put in this learning module, that comparing the different lines and the divisions between the different lines and matching them up and seeing how they correlate is really the key to understanding Socrates' argument in the Republic. But this division they've made is a division in reality between those things which are visible, sensible, things you see, hear, touch, smell, taste, and those things which are intelligible, thinkable, the invisible realm. And it should be clear now that Socrates is what we may call a metaphysical idealist. Now, an idealist in this specific sense, I mean someone who believes that what's truly real are ideas, things that cannot be seen but can only be thought. That is the fundamental level of reality, that what has being is always conceptual, intellectual, a pure idea. And he asks Glaucon to imagine a line, and that line is represented at the bottom of page 205. It's more or less the same basic structure as the line that I've created in the notes. And he asks him to divide the line into two parts, two unequal parts, and then to divide the line again, that is, each of the two unequal parts into further unequal parts. So we end up with one major division and then two minor divisions that divide up the major divisions. And you'll see page 206, 205, 206, he imagines that at the very bottom of that line we put images, representations, shadows, things like that. The next step up, physical things, the things of which those former things were representations or shadows of, and that completes the visible realm, which is the larger part of the line. So at the very bottom we have images, shadows, representations. The level above that we have the physical things, the natural things that are the originals of those representations, and that's where we hit the ceiling of the major division. Above that division, we'll call that the intelligible realm, the thinkable realm, and on the first subsection of that, in a rather complicated way, he asks us to put the objects of mathematics. So here we can imagine numbers, relations, the kind of figures that are dealt with in geometry, and he makes it clear that he doesn't mean actual physical triangles, circles, angles, squares, but the ideas, the concepts that those things are based upon. That is, we all know that any triangle that we draw will somehow or another just be sort of an imperfect thing. It won't actually absolutely measure up to the definition of triangle, which is a three-sided figure whose interior angles equal two right angles, or 180 degrees. That's a concept. That's the definition of a triangle. Theorems, relations, numbers, we know that we can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or we can count our fingers, but there's a concept of each one of those numbers, which can be expressed in any different way in different languages, different systems of representing numbers and things like that. In any case, those mathematical objects, which are thinkable, not visible, but thinkable, go on the first subsection of the upper part of the line. And then at the very top, the familiar forms, the form of justice, the form of beauty, the form of the good, the form of virtue, etc., etc., those perfect ideas which Socrates described earlier. So if we can visualize that, and I would ask you at this point, look at that, print out and look at that, or look on your computer, that representation of the divided line that I gave you, what do we have? We have a metaphysics. That is, we have a theory of reality. And we have certain claims there about what is real, what is most real, which are very important claims for the success or failure of Socrates' argument. For Socrates, what is most real is what can be thought, what can be grasped with the mind. That is the realm of being. For Socrates, something like the form of beauty, the form of justice, is an unchangeable, eternal, true thing. It's always the same. Or something physical, a bunch of bananas, say, being material and changeable, and in a way not as fully knowable as those other things, is less real. No, gosh, what does he mean by this? Well, think about it this way, perhaps. Think about any physical object, and ask yourself, what does it mean to know it? What does it mean to know about this bunch of bananas? Well, the truth is I know as much as I need to know. You know, they appear to be ripe, so they're edible. You know, they're yellow. They conform to my expectations of bananas. But that's practical knowledge. Now, if we're going to get kind of silly here and ask ourselves what would it mean to know any physical object completely, we very quickly realize that that's impossible. That is, take these scissors. Again, I know them practically as much as I need to know them or know about them. Or yes, scissors singular, plural. But what would it mean to know this pair of scissors completely? As I very quickly run into the fundamental truth that that's impossible. First of all, just part of knowing any physical object is knowing what it looks like. But from what perspective? What side of it? From what angle? I realize that all my knowledge of physical things is perspectival. That is, it always comes from a certain perspective. And since there are an infinite number of possible perspectives, it's actually impossible to know everything about a physical object. Not that we would want to, or that it's a problem that we can. It's just the fundamental truth. Now compare that with our knowledge of certain concepts or ideas, especially mathematical ones. Let's start with that. Now let's think of the number 1. Of course, the number 1 can be represented in any number of different ways, in languages and mathematical systems. We could have the Arabic 1, we could have the Roman numeral 1, we could have the English word 1, we could have the Italian word uno, we could have the German word ein, and all of them would simply be symbols. Now the notion is, though, that they all mean the same thing, right? They all point to the concept of 1. But where can you write that? You can't write that down. Whatever it is that the object, that those symbols, again, Roman numeral, Arabic numeral, English 1, Italian uno, they all point to something which itself cannot be represented well, can be represented, but a concept which can be represented but is distinct from those representations, because there's many representations that point to the same thing. But we all can grasp with our minds the number 1, the concept of 1. Now, I think one of the things that Plato would say is if you grasp the concept of 1, you grasp it absolutely. That is, if you understand the concept of 1, it's not like the physical object where there's always some side of it that you haven't caught or taken into consideration. No. The concept of 1, if you grasp it all at once, you grasp it completely. And you know it completely. So, one of the important things for Plato is when he says earlier, that which is most completely knowable. So it's ideas, like the number 1, and to his mind, also things like the forms of justice, beauty, etc., that have real being and can be known thoroughly, absolutely, exhaustively, unlike physical objects, which are always changing and depend on perspective and are coming into existence and going out of existence. So we can have no true knowledge of those things. And so, because they're not truly real. So Plato's metaphysics is one which can be called an idealism because it's ideas that are real, and that's what's really going on in that divided line.